I was folding the small towels into the nursery drawer when my phone vibrated, just as the wind outside the window carried the scent of the first snow. Colorado State Patrol appeared on the screen, a line of text that made my heart drop. Mrs. Carter, your husband, Landon Pierce, has just been taken to St. Mercy. I held onto the edge of the crib to steady myself. Then the officer paused, his voice lowering as if afraid his words might shatter something fragile inside me, and he wasn't alone. A silence as long as a lifetime. And his wedding ring, it wasn't on his hand when we found him. The world tilted, and I knew nothing from this moment on would ever be the same again. I don't remember how I managed to get down the stairs or rush across the driveway to the parking lot. All I knew was that when I opened the car door, the cold rising from the leather seat sent a shiver through my spine. The snow was falling thicker than it had 10 minutes earlier, each tiny white flake clinging to the windshield like shattered pieces of memory woven together. I buckled my seatbelt, my hands trembling so much I had to grip the steering wheel with both hands. I didn't dare turn on the radio. Didn't dare listen to anything except my own heartbeat. The drive to St. Mercy was only 15 minutes from home, but that afternoon, every red light, every slow car ahead, every ambulance siren at an intersection felt like it was testing the last thread of calm inside me. In the rearview mirror, my face looked paler than the snow. My eyes were swollen not from crying but from the way I was holding back the tears gathering behind my eyelids, ready to spill at any moment. I was afraid that if I cried, I wouldn't be able to see the road. And more than anything, I was afraid that when I arrived, I would have to face something I could never forgive. The hospital gate appeared like a blur of white light in the blizzard. I pulled up at the emergency entrance, my heartbeat so sharp it hurt every time I took a deep breath. The smell of disinfectant mixed with icy air rushed against my face as the sliding doors opened. The first steps into the long hallway of Wing A felt like walking into another world, where every sound echoed and every passing glance lingered just long enough for me to know they had noticed my belly. The belly of a woman about to give birth, searching for her husband in the middle of chaos. I reached the intake desk and forced out his name. "And name?" "Patient name," the nurse asked, her voice steady but her eyes unbearably sympathetic. "Landon Pierce," I said, my breath unsteady. She looked down and typed a few lines, then a printed form slid toward me. "He's in the temporary observation bay, and, ma'am, I think you should know the person who was with him was also brought in." I swallowed with difficulty. "Name?" The nurse didn't answer, she simply tilted the paper so I could see it clearly. In that moment, something inside me felt as if it had fallen straight through thin ice. "Passenger, Mira Lane." Mira, the girl who often brought chocolate chip cookies to my door every weekend. The one with the warm smile and the familiar question, "Is the baby kicking more now, Rose?" A cold rush slammed into my chest, as if someone had opened a window I didn't know existed. I folded the paper. For a second, I thought I could crush it in my hand. But my hand was too weak, and that weakness made my heart ache even more. The nurse looked up at me, concern flickering in her eyes. "Do you need to sit down? I can get you some water." "No." I shook my head. Just show me where his room is." She pointed down the hallway to the left. I began walking, but each step felt 10 pounds heavier than the last. Along Wing B, the air felt strange, the scent of antiseptic thickened, the lights grew harsher, and an emptiness settled around me. My belly felt heavier too, as if the baby sensed something was wrong and pushed against me in frantic little kicks. I turned the corner, nearing the nurse station. An older nurse stood there, glasses on, her face stern but kind. "Mrs. Carter?" she asked softly. I nodded. "Your husband is stable now. A strong impact, but not life-threatening. He's being moved to observation." I gripped the counter and took a long breath. "Thank you. Thank you so much." The older nurse seemed like she wanted to add something, paused, then spoke gently. "The passenger. She's in the room next door. She's not seriously injured. But she seems, what? Very shaken." I couldn't tell what was rising inside me, anger, confusion, or just a small crack running through my heart. She handed me a clipboard to sign. I didn't look at the paper again. I knew I would lose whatever stability I had left if I saw Mira's name one more time. I signed quickly. The nurse placed a light hand on my wrist. "Do you want someone to walk with you?" I shook my head. The last thing I wanted was another witness to my collapse. The hallway leading to the observation rooms felt so long that I suddenly felt like I was walking through a tunnel with no end. Every step brought me closer to the truth, and every truth could change the direction of my entire life. I paused, placed my hand against the wall, and tried to steady my breath. From far away came the sound of a doctor's shoes and the soft beeping of monitors like my own heartbeat. Racing, room 14. I looked at the number with the eyes of someone unsure whether they wanted to see what waited behind that door. I raised my hand to the handle, but before I touched it, a movement from the next room caught my eye. The door of room 15 was slightly open, and through that narrow gap, I saw a silhouette so familiar my heart jolted. Dark hair, tied neatly, a cheekbone with a tiny freckle I remembered clearly from the times she smiled at me in the hallway, an arm wrapped in bandages, and vacant, dazed eyes staring into nowhere, as if she no longer recognized where she was. Mira Lane. The woman who used to lean down and gently stroke my belly every time we met in the elevator. Asking a question so sweet it had never once occurred to me, it could turn into a shard of pain. Rose? Was the little one good today? At that moment, the door of room 14 opened, and a young doctor stepped out. "Mrs. Carter, you're here. I'll take you in." I don't remember whether I nodded or simply stood still. I only knew my heart tightened, and something in the air, something small, something fragile had just snapped. Not exactly because Mira's name was on the paper. Not exactly because Landon's wedding ring was missing from his hand, but because I felt something was seriously wrong. Just not in the way I had thought. I stepped into the observation room in a strange state, as if my body had walked in first, while my mind was still stuck somewhere in the hallway, where I had just seen Mira's silhouette through the cracked door. The door closed softly behind me, shutting out the sounds of life outside, leaving only the thick scent of antiseptic and the cold white light that felt like it was seeping through my skin. Landon lay on the bed to the right, his left arm secured in a brace, his face pale and still enough that it scared me that if I walked too close, I might hear something I wasn't strong enough to handle. But what made me stop wasn't Landon. It was Mira. She lay on the bed to the left, her right leg bandaged up to the knee, her hair a tangled mess, her eyes swollen from crying. But Mira wasn't looking at me. She stared down at her hands, as if trying to gather the pieces that had fallen from a life she didn't understand how it had shattered so fast. And between the two beds, standing like a shadow separate from both, was Daniel Lane. He turned the moment he heard the door, his dark brown eyes sweeping across my face slowly. Too slowly to be surprise, but not slowly enough to be indifference. That look made me feel something strange, like he had been standing there for a long time, waiting for me, not waiting for news about his wife. I hadn't even taken another step when Daniel spoke. His voice was low, steady, without a trace of the panic or trembling you would expect from a husband told that his wife had just been in a crash with another man. "Finally, it's happened." The sentence struck my ears like a thin needle-piercing fabric, small enough not to be loud, but sharp enough to make my chest tighten. I stared at him, trying to find anger, sadness, betrayal, anything a normal person might show in a situation like this, but I saw nothing, only something that looked like he already knew. "What are you talking about, Daniel?" I asked, my voice both soft and hoarse. As if I wasn't sure I even had the right to demand answers in that moment, Daniel exhaled not a heavy sigh, but the kind of breath someone lets out when they open a door and see exactly what they expected. "I knew you would come," he said, his eyes shifting from Landon to Mira. "I also knew this day couldn't be avoided." I felt the air in the room tighten like a drawn violin string. Mira burst into harder sobs, as if that sentence had knocked away the last anchor keeping her steady on the hospital bed. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders trembling uncontrollably. I took another step, my legs feeling like stone. "Daniel," I said slowly, "what do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. That unsettled me even more. He looked at Mira, his expression nothing like that of a husband in pain. It was colder, farther, as if she was no longer the center of this story. Rose? Daniel said, turning back to me. I think there are a few things you need to see before I say anything. I blinked. What things? Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small object, a silver USB drive. Cold and gleaming under the light, Daniel stepped forward, lifting the USB high enough for me to see the faint scratches on its metal surface. Landon gave this to me 2 weeks ago, Daniel said, his voice neither loud nor quiet. And he told me, if anything happened to him, I had to give it to you. Why would he give it to you? I asked, the question slipping out instinctively. You two aren't even close. Not close, Daniel repeated, looking straight into my eyes. But some things, people can only say to someone on the outside. I wanted to sit down. To hold on to something. To find something solid. But my legs refused to move. Mira lifted her head slightly, her voice frayed like a thread pulled to its final limit. Daniel. Don't do this. Not right now. Daniel turned toward her, his gaze sharpening so suddenly that I shivered. Not right now, he repeated. If not now, then when things get even worse. A cold rush ran down my spine. I didn't understand everything, but I understood enough to know that what was happening wasn't what I had thought. Daniel turned back to me. There's something very dangerous that Landon uncovered, he said slowly. And Mira got pulled in only because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Mira broke into sobs again. I didn't know anything. She choked. My sister is missing. I just wanted to find a clue. I didn't know things would end up like this. I looked at her. The initial anger inside me pulling back, making room for a shapeless confusion. Daniel exhaled sharply through his nose, as if fighting the urge to explode. Rose, he said, this isn't my story. And it's not entirely Mira's either. He extended the USB toward me. This is your story, and Landon's. I reached out, but my hand was shaking so badly that Daniel had to take my hand and place the USB in my palm himself. Something so small, yet it felt heavy enough to pull down an entire house. The doctor walked in at that moment, cutting through the dense air. He checked the monitor, looked over Landon's arm brace, and scribbled a few lines on the chart. He'll wake up in a few minutes, the doctor said. Still looking at the machines. You can stay if you want. Daniel murmured. You should stay. He'll want to talk to you first. I looked at Mira. She had her head bowed, tears falling uncontrollably onto the pale green blanket. Daniel looked at his wife for so long that I had to turn away, feeling like someone else's heart was being exposed too clearly in front of me. But that look, it wasn't anger. It wasn't disappointment. It was something closer to recognizing a bitter truth he had waited a long time to finally say out loud. Finally, it's happened. He whispered again. This time not to me but to himself. I looked at the USB in my hand, the coldness of the metal seeping back through my skin. Daniel stepped back, as if to pull himself out of the space between me and Mira. She still kept her head bowed, gripping the edge of the blanket, not daring to look at me yet, saying nothing more. On the left side of the room, a young doctor had just walked in, flipping the chart at the foot of Landon's bed. He wrote a few notes, then turned toward me. His voice soft but clear. He'll wake in a few minutes. When he does, it's best if you ask him directly, before the pain medication kicks in again. I flinched slightly. Ask him what? The doctor glanced quickly at Daniel, and then at Mira, as if weighing whether he should say more. He only replied. He said your name right before he lost consciousness. And there was one more sentence. I think you'll want to hear it from him. I tightened my grip around the USB. That sentence made my heartbeat skip, not from fear, but from the sense that the conversation ahead wouldn't be about a missing ring or Mira's name on an emergency form. Beside Mira's bed, the monitor began beeping faster because she turned too sharply. Daniel placed his hand on the rail near her, glancing at his wife briefly before turning back to me, his voice low and clipped. You should prepare yourself. Landon knows more than you think. I inhaled deeply, stepping half a pace back to steady myself. The air, cold as it was, carried the distinct feeling that someone was waiting for me to act, as if holding this USB was only the beginning. Outside in the hallway, the wheels of a gurney rolled along the floor with a steady rhythm. Pulling me back to the present, I looked at Landon once more. Then at the doorway opened just a crack, and I knew I was no longer standing on the edge of this story. I moved toward the chair beside his bed, placed the USB on my lap, and waited for him to wake up, not to ease my mind, but to know what exactly he thought he was hiding. I hadn't even managed to sit down when Daniel motioned for me to step outside. He didn't raise his voice, but his eyes were enough for me to understand that whatever he was about to say shouldn't be spoken in front of Mira, or anyone else in that room. I followed him into the hallway. The door closed softly behind us, leaving inside the steady beeping of monitors like they were masking something. The hospital lights washed over my already tired eyes, making everything feel brighter than it should. I leaned lightly against the wall, one hand supporting my belly, the other half curled around the USB that had been placed in my palm only minutes earlier. Daniel stopped beside the small window overlooking the parking lot. Outside, the snow kept falling, tiny white flakes spinning under the yellow lights of the lot, looking peaceful, completely at odds with what was happening inside my head. He didn't look at me right away. Instead, he watched the gray winter sky for a long moment, as if deciding where to start. And I realized this wasn't empty silence. This was the silence of someone who knew that once he spoke, nothing could ever go back to the way it was. Finally, Daniel said, "Landon has been contacting me these past 2 weeks." I felt my hand tighten around the USB so hard the metal dug painfully into my skin. My voice came out so quietly I barely recognized it. "Contacting you? About what?" Daniel finally turned to look at me. His eyes held no uncertainty, no comforting softness. They were the eyes of someone who had seen more than he wanted to say aloud. "He knew something," Daniel said, each word landing on the floor with deliberate weight, "but he didn't dare tell anyone else." "Why? You?" I asked, unable to hide my confusion. Daniel didn't avoid the question. He crossed his arms, his expression tightening as if recalling the past few days. "Landon and I," he said, "aren't close friends, but we've worked together a few times on the residence council, building maintenance issues, repair funds, those bits of brick. A brack everyone else ignores. But Landon actually pays attention to. He always notices what others overlook." I swallowed against the tightness climbing up my throat. "So, what did he discover? You could say." He paused, choosing his words. "There's money in our building that isn't going where it's supposed to go." "You mean fraud?" Daniel shrugged, the gesture looking like someone who didn't want to believe it but had no choice because all the evidence pointed one way. "I don't have enough data to use that word." "But Landon does," he said. "He sent me a few files. At first I thought they were technical reports. Then I realized they were a string of altered documents." I felt like another layer of fog in my mind had just lifted. This wasn't infidelity. Not a caught-in-the-act story. Not something trivial like I had assumed when I saw Mira's name on the emergency form. This was entirely different. Daniel continued. "He told me someone on the building's management board was trying to hide transferred funds. A small amount, not huge, but consistent. At first I thought it was a system error, but Landon," he stopped, his voice dropping. "Landon believed someone didn't want him to know the truth." I gripped the window frame to steady myself. "You mean someone threatened him?" He looked at me. A look that was answer enough. I asked again, this time with more certainty. "Did Landon ever tell you this? Had anything to do with Mira?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "No. He only said Mira accidentally saw something she shouldn't have. When she was taking pictures in the parking lot." "What did she tell you?" "Not much," Daniel said, a faint bitterness in his tone. "Just enough for me to know that Mira being in Landon's car tonight isn't what either of you think." My chest tightened, a flicker of relief surfaced only to be immediately overtaken by something else, fear. If it wasn't an affair, then what brought them together in the same car tonight? "He was going to show me that USB," Daniel added, his eyes shifting toward my hand, "but he never got the chance. Landon said only if something happened. I should give it to you." Something, I repeated. You mean? What kind of something? Tonight's crash wasn't an accident. I can't confirm that, Daniel said. But he called me 3 days ago, sounding terrified. Landon said someone was watching the parking lot. Someone got into the elevator on our floor at midnight. And Daniel stopped. And I urged. He said if suddenly anything happened, then under no circumstances should you be left alone in that apartment. On the bench across from us, an older couple was waiting for news about their son after surgery. They sat far from me, knowing nothing about what was unfolding, yet their worried eyes fixed on the hallway as if searching for a sliver of hope. That strangely peaceful scene overwhelmed me even more. Everything outside was still happening normally, while my world was being distorted inch by inch. I tightened my grip on the USB. Does Mira know? I asked. She knows part of it, Daniel answered, not the whole thing. And you? I asked quietly, studying him. Daniel looked at me. And for the first time that night, I saw exhaustion carved into his eyes. I know enough to understand that what just happened isn't simple. A hospital announcement came through the speakers, unnervingly cheerful in the heavy atmosphere. Dr. Harper, please report to Emergency Station 4. Daniel looked through the glass pane into the room. Seeing Mira wiping her face, trying to steady herself, he turned back to me. You need to talk to Landon. As soon as he wakes up. I forced my breath to slow. Daniel held my gaze for one more second, as if weighing something, then he said. That USB. Rose, don't open it here. At home, no. Wait until someone is with you. Do you understand? I didn't know if I fully understood, but part of me knew. This warning wasn't unnecessary. Daniel walked back into the room to be with Mira, leaving me alone in the too bright hospital hallway. I looked toward the parking lot, where snow still fell steadily under the yellow lights. Everything so quiet it felt like no danger could possibly exist outside. I returned to Landon's room, stepping into the scent of antiseptic and the cold light. The doctor had just left. The monitor beside the bed signaled a small shift. Landon's fingers had begun to move. I pulled the chair closer, placed the USB on my lap, and clasped my hands together to stay composed. Not out of fear of facing a husband who might have been unfaithful, but because I didn't know what the first words out of his mouth would be when he woke. I sat at the edge of the bed, holding my breath in my chest as if taking too strong a breath might plunge the whole room into chaos. The doctor had been gone less than a minute, when Landon stirred. A thin groan slipped from his throat, so faint. Yet in that moment, it felt like it tore through the silence of the room. Landon. I leaned down, afraid to touch him. Afraid to break something even more fragile than the brace on his arm. His eyelid twitched, then opened little by little, as if his eyes were fighting between sleep and consciousness. When the hospital lights reached his gaze, I watched clarity return in layers quickly. He didn't ask why I was there, didn't ask what had happened. The only thing Landon said was, Rose. Don't go back to the apartment. Don't go home. His voice was hoarse, like sand lodged in his throat, but each word was sharp, clear, trembling enough to make my scalp prickle. I stepped back half a pace, both to catch my breath and to look into his eyes more clearly. Why? I asked softly. He turned his head, tried to push himself up, but the pain forced him back down. Don't, absolutely don't go there. Someone. Landon. Before he could answer, Mira's faint voice drifted from the other bed. She was lying on her side toward us, half her face hidden under her bandaged arm. She didn't look at me. Didn't look at Landon, only at some empty corner of the room. They tried to kill him. Mira whispered. Not because of me. The words dropped into the room like a heavy piece of metal. For a few seconds, I thought I had misheard. But Mira's trembling hand said she wasn't confusing physical pain with the truth. Landon closed his eyes for a moment, as if Mira had spoken aloud the thing he hadn't wanted to say in front of me. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then he opened them again. Just as Mira turned toward the wall, curling into herself as if wishing to disappear. I stood up straight, my fingers subconsciously reaching into my coat pocket. Where the USB lay, I pulled the chair closer. Set my bag on my lap. Then took the USB out. Landon. This? You gave it to Daniel. You wanted me to see it, didn't you? His throat moved in a swallow, and that was his answer. Not a nod. But an admission. I opened the hospital laptop. A nurse had left it on the table, the screen glowing faintly in the corner. When the USB clicked in, the tiny sound felt like an offbeat heartbeat. I scanned the folders. They were all coded: A7-21, CAM, B2 log BLK3. I clicked on the first file marked in red, a marker Daniel said Landon had added so I wouldn't confuse it. The video opened, no sound, only images. The underground parking garage of the building where I had lived for 4 years, empty, with flickering fluorescent lights. I had walked through this place hundreds of times, without ever finding it frightening like I did now. I glued my eyes to the frame. A man wearing a black hoodie stepped into view, walking calmly. Not like a thief. He went straight to Landon's SUV, the one I had complained about 3 months ago because Landon kept leaving tools in the trunk. The man bent down, opened the car door. No signs of forced entry. He opened the car like he had a key. I blinked. No, I wasn't mistaken. I zoomed in on the camera panel, and it became clearer. The door opened smoothly. The man sat in the driver's seat for about 10 seconds, then stepped out. He took nothing, left nothing. But I saw a tiny spark at the ignition. Landon. I turned to him. Do you know who that is? Landon clenched his jaw. His face paled. A second later, he spoke. Rose. He wasn't stealing the car. Then what was he doing? Are planting something, Landon said, his voice so low I had to lean closer. They just needed the engine to start, and it'd all be done. Why? Why would they do that? I asked. Like someone standing before a locked door. Knowing what lay behind was something they weren't ready to see. Because I knew too much. Landon replied. Mira turned back, her eyes swollen, and for the first time that night, she looked straight at me. Rose. He saved me, Mira said, her voice thin as breath. I wasn't the target. He only covered for me because I was the first person to notice that strange car showing up a few nights ago. But they weren't after me, I asked quietly. Who are they? Mira shook her head. I don't know, but Daniel knows more than he's saying. Landon immediately turned toward Mira, his eyes widening in panic. Mira, no, don't drag Daniel into this. Landon, Mira's voice broke. You don't understand. The door swung open. Daniel stood there, snowflakes melting on his sleeve, his expression calm enough to make something colder than the winter air settle inside me. He looked at all three of us, his gaze not lingering on anyone too long, before he spoke, very softly. We need to talk, all of us. But the way Daniel said it made me realize instantly. He didn't walk in to ask whether his wife was okay. Rose, he said. There are things you need to hear. And I'll say them before Landon does. Landon pushed himself up, pain twisting his face. But he still tried to sit. Daniel, no. Not now, not now. Daniel repeated, his voice low. After your car exploded halfway down the road, after Mira got dragged into it, after Rose saw that footage, this is exactly the time. I turned to Landon, his eyes held 1,000 things trying to break out but locked behind them. He shook his head at me, very slightly, as if telling me not to listen. I placed my hand on the edge of the table, tightening my grip, then looked at Daniel. I'm listening, I said. Daniel turned, the light casting his face in a harsher, more unfamiliar expression than I had ever seen on him. Tonight's crash, Daniel began, wasn't the first incident. 2 weeks ago someone tried to ram Landon's car in the garage. Why didn't you tell me? Landon finally looked at me. In his eyes wasn't just fear for himself, there was something that looked like despair. Rose. I didn't know how to tell you without pulling you into it. He whispered. I thought. If you stayed away, you and the baby would be safer. Our member sentiment. Daniel placed his hand on the table and pushed the USB toward me slightly, as if confirming that all attempts to avoid the truth were over. It all started with this, he said. And up until now, none of us fully understand what Landon accidentally stepped into. Just as Daniel finished speaking, Landon's monitor let out a soft long beep before returning to its steady rhythm. I glanced over and saw his eyelid twitch, like something still unsettled him. Even in his half-conscious state, I pulled the chair closer, setting the USB on the small bedside table. My fingers brushed the cold metal, and for the first time I felt something clearly. Whatever was on that USB was not something Landon ever meant to hide from me forever. Daniel stood by the door, both hands in his coat pockets, his eyes wary not of me but of the doorway, as if expecting someone to walk through it. Mira sat with her head lowered, her shoulders trembling lightly as if she could still hear the screech of brakes in her mind. The baby kicked once slow, firm as if reminding me to focus. Daniel, I said, my eyes still on Landon. If you know anything else, say it. He glanced briefly at Mira, then stepped forward. That USB doesn't have only video. I didn't speak. I waited. There's a list, Daniel continued. Times, movement logs, names of people entering the garage at unusual hours. I turned to him. A list of who? Daniel looked at me, and for the first time all night, the calm expression slipped from his face. Of the people Landon believes are involved. I didn't ask further. Daniel nudged the USB a bit closer gently, as if afraid a strong movement would break everything. Landon cracked his eyes open, trying to lift his head. I immediately stood up to support his shoulder. He looked at me first, not with the eyes of a husband who had done something wrong, but of a man who knew something terrible had arrived at the door before he could stop it. Rose. His voice was so hoarse it was almost just breath. You must not look at that. When you're alone. I squeezed his hand. Then tell me. What's in it? Landon swallowed, his eyes shifting to Daniel, then to Mira. A very brief hesitation, then he looked back at me longer. The name of the person who opened my car, Landon said. The name of someone who works in our own building. Right then, the hospital speaker called another doctor. Mira lifted her head, her eyes red but clearer than before. I told you already, Mira said quietly to Daniel. We shouldn't go back to the apartment. They know every schedule. Daniel rubbed his forehead, like someone too tired to hide anything anymore. Rose, he said, it's not just Mira and Landon who were being watched. I looked at him, my heart sinking. You're on the list too. Mira lowered the blanket a little. Taking a deep breath as if bracing herself, she looked at Daniel before speaking, almost asking permission. Daniel gave a faint nod, saying nothing. Landon turned slightly toward us, though it looked painful to move. I have to tell you this, Mira said, and I'll say it clearly. So you don't have to guess anymore. I don't have anything with Landon. I responded with a small nod. I didn't need Mira to prove it with more words. Daniel moved a half step closer to Mira, placing his hand on the metal bar at the foot of her bed. Go on, he said softly. Mira stared at the empty space in front of her, as if looking straight through the hospital wall. I have a younger sister, she began. Her name is Lila. Lila went missing 6 months ago, Mira said. No one found a trace. No camera caught her. No one saw her last. The police said Lila left the city, but I know she didn't. She lifted a hand to her forehead, then dropped it immediately as if afraid she'd lose courage if she held it there longer. That night, before she disappeared, Lila came to the building where we live. Mira looked straight at me. She came to see me, but she never made it up to the apartment. My feet felt cold. Daniel didn't look at me, he looked at Mira, his expression that of someone who had heard this before, yet never found it easier. You're sure? I asked. Sure. Mira replied immediately. I checked every camera in the building. Some footage was erased, but 2 clips were left. In them, Lila walks toward the basement elevator. After that, nothing, Daniel added. Very clean. No shoe prints. No hallway footage. Whoever it was knew exactly what they were doing. I turned to Landon. He tried to lean against the pillow, grimacing. Rose. he said softly. Mira showed me some reports about the maintenance fund. I only meant to check them quickly for her. But the numbers were too altered. Clearly someone was tampering with them. Mira continued, this time more slowly. The building's maintenance fund has been siphoned off in small batches for 3 years. No one noticed. But when I matched the dates with the times Lila visited or passed through that area, they aligned with the days the cameras were wiped. Daniel remained by the bed, his fist now clenched. I joined the residence council because Mira asked me to look into it, Daniel said. And Landon had access to the technical schematics. None of us wanted to drag each other in. But if we wanted to understand what happened to Lila, we had to look. So the 3 of you work together? I asked. Yes, Mira answered, not sneaking around romantically. We were trying to see who was hiding something in that building. Landon narrowed his eyes, his voice low and rough. And I think they knew, Daniel clarified. A week ago, Landon was chased in the garage. 3 nights after that, Mira heard footsteps behind her when she left the gym. And tonight, they were hit the moment they pulled out of the basement. Mira pulled the blanket up, gripping the edge tightly. Rose. I know you're pregnant, I didn't want to pull you in, but I swear, tonight's crash wasn't aimed at me. It was aimed at Landon. Landon shot Mira a look. Don't say that. Landon. Daniel cut in. She's right. I stared at Landon for a long moment. When did you know? About 3 weeks. You didn't tell me because you were afraid I'd worry. Afraid the baby, and I would be in danger. Mira spoke again. We met a few times, in the cafe near our building. In the empty units no one has moved into yet. Not an affair. We were cross-checking records. Daniel added. And tracking a few people in the building. 3 have access to the camera room, 2 can approve the funds, 1 person knows the backdoor code to the basement elevator. You know who that person is. Daniel didn't blink. There's a name. But not enough proof yet. Mira tilted her head back, her eyes toward the ceiling. Lila once told me, don't trust anyone on the management board. Back then I thought she was just stressed from work. But now. The sentence hung unfinished. But it didn't need to be completed. Daniel braced his hand on the bed rail, his face pulled tight like a wire. Rose, this is no longer just Landon's or Mira's problem. You live in that building. Whoever's been watching them knows the schedules, the habits, and even the personal information. Landon shifted, trying to reach out toward me. Rose. You have to leave that place. I didn't answer. Not because I hesitated. But because my mind was running through every face in the building, the night guard, the building manager with her reassuring smile, the maintenance man always carrying a clipboard down the hall. Which of them had seen Lila? Who erased the cameras? Who rammed Landon's car? Daniel spoke more quietly than usual. Tonight, they were just a little slow. If they had been faster, we wouldn't be sitting here talking. Mira turned to look at me, her eyes red but clear. You don't have to believe me, but believe this, I already lost someone in that building. I don't want to lose anyone else. I stood up, not because I wanted to leave, but because sitting too long made my back ache. The baby kicked once gentle but firm enough for me to feel my entire body stepping into a crossroads none of us had chosen. Daniel looked at me and asked softly. Rose? Do you want to hear the rest? I looked at all 3 of them. The answer was already there. Not to end anything, but to begin the most dangerous part of the night. I left the hospital when the clock was close to 3 in the morning. The parking lot was covered in a thin sheet of snow, and the yellow streetlights made the car windows glisten as if someone had just touched them. I stood outside my car for a few seconds, my hand on the door, checking my surroundings out of instinct. No one was there, but the feeling that someone had just left lingered in the air. I opened the door, buckled my seatbelt, and only when the engine started did I realize my hands were so cold I could barely grip the steering wheel. Snow fell heavier on the drive from the hospital, each flake hitting the windshield like quiet knocks, reminding me to stay alert. I didn't plan to stay home long. Daniel had been clear. Go with someone, but Daniel and Mira were still at the hospital, and Landon couldn't even sit up. I didn't want to call anyone at this hour. And I needed my prenatal file, a few clothes, and the medication the doctor told me to bring if I had to stay somewhere else. I turned off the headlights completely before stepping out. The parking lot in front of the building was darker than usual. The bulb near the elevator door had been broken for days. And the building still hadn't fixed it. I pulled my coat tight, kept one hand in my right pocket, pretending to look for keys, but really holding the pepper spray I always carried. The lobby was empty, no night guard at the desk. I tapped my card on the elevator scanner, heard the familiar beep, and stepped inside. The door opened with a soft ding. The hallway was long and quiet. Every apartment door was shut, and the motion sensor lights glowed faintly along the floor. I walked to my door. Turned the key. The lock opened normally, no signs of tampering. But the moment I opened the door, I knew something was off. Just a few minutes, I whispered to myself. I turned on the kitchen light first. The white light spilled over the clean granite counter. The towel I folded earlier still in place. No one had rummaged through the kitchen. No stray hair, no cabinet door left open. But when I passed the living room, the darkness at the end of the hallway seemed darker than usual, as if something was blocking the light. I continued forward and turned on the bedroom light. Everything was intact. The blanket I folded was still on the bed. The closet shut. Nothing out of place. I turned toward the nursery. The door was ajar. I was certain I had closed it before leaving for the hospital. I pushed it open with my fingertip. The room light was off, but the hallway glow was enough for me to see. The baby dresser drawers were pulled open. Little outfits hung crooked. One had fallen to the floor as if someone had yanked it and dropped it, and on the blanket a cream-colored envelope lay perfectly centered, no dust, no creases. As if someone placed it there moments ago, I stepped closer to the crib and picked up the envelope. On the front was a single sentence: "We saw you at the hospital." No sender, no signature, no obvious fingerprints. My phone vibrated hard in my coat pocket. I jerked, nearly dropping the envelope. I looked down at the screen. Unknown number, no area code. No name. I didn't want to answer. But if I didn't, the ringing would alert the neighbors and I didn't want anyone else pulled into this. I answered. The other end stayed silent for a few seconds. I heard breathing. Then a man's voice came through, low and very clear. "Rose Carter, if you tell anyone what you just saw, your baby will never be born." I froze. That voice, I had heard it somewhere in the building. More than once. I held the phone, saying nothing, listening for anything else. He hung up right after that. I put the envelope in my coat pocket and zipped it shut. I left the nursery, turned off the hall light, and walked quickly to the front door. At the end of the hallway, beside the elevator, a small camera glowed. I had never noticed it before. It was aimed directly at my door. Someone wasn't just watching Mira or Landon. They were watching me. And they wanted me to know it. I left the building like someone escaping a room with no air. The sky was shifting to the bluish gray of the early morning hours, the streets still empty. The streetlights stretching long shadows across the snow. I got into my car, locked the door immediately, and only then did I exhale. My hand rested on my belly out of instinct, not to calm myself but to make sure the baby was still safe. I didn't go straight to the hospital. I parked beside a 24-hour convenience store, turned on the car's interior light, and checked my coat pocket. The envelope was still there. My phone was silent. I sat for a few minutes, listening to the heater hum, then turned the car back toward the hospital. Daniel had said, "Don't go alone," but it was too late for that. All I could do now was return to a place with lights, people, and locked doors. The hospital hallway was the same. The disinfectant smell, rubber-soled footsteps, machines beeping steady notes. But when I opened the observation room door, something felt different. Mira was more awake, leaning against the headboard, and Daniel sat in the chair, his hands clasped, elbows on his knees. He turned when I walked in. "You shouldn't have gone home," he said immediately. "I know," I answered softly, Landon was more alert too. He looked up, his eyes still hazy but clear enough to recognize my face. "You actually went back?" he asked the moment I closed the door behind me. "I needed things," I said. "And?" "Someone went into the baby's room." Daniel stood up straight. "They went into the nursery." Mira shut her eyes, her fingers gripping the blanket so tightly the knuckles turned white. Landon tried to sit up, but a sharp pain stopped him. "I told you don't go back there alone." I didn't want to say the threat out loud in a room full of injured people. But Daniel looked at me for a few extra seconds, as if reading something on my face. "Did someone contact you?" And to this day, I didn't answer immediately, but my silence was enough. "All right." Daniel exhaled. "We're running out of time." He pulled a canvas bag from under his chair and set it on the tiny metal table in the center of the room. "I think it's time to put everything together." I looked at the bag. Something small slid out first, a thin stack of photos, phone quality but printed on good paper. Mira reached for them, spreading them neatly in a row with the practiced habit of someone who once worked as a teacher. I looked at each one. A photo Mira took of the license plate of a black SUV, the basement hallway of my building, a shadowed figure with a hood pulled low, the door to the technical room its lock replaced, a torn scrap from a maintenance bulletin board, the image of a man in building maintenance uniform, but his face angled away, as if he didn't want to be seen. Then Daniel placed the second item on the table. Documents, not photocopies, but originals, thick paper. The edges still dusted with concrete. Landon gestured with his chin. "I found those in the technical room when I went to inspect the ventilation system. It's not an area regular staff are supposed to enter." Mira took a deep breath. "He sent them to me. Told me to hold on to them in case something happened." Daniel looked at me, his voice gentler than earlier. "Landon came to me only because I'm the one person in the building who isn't on the list the manager trusts." "What do you mean?" "Rose." Mira cut in, her voice soft but steady. "He's talking about the building manager, the guy everyone thinks is just a grumpy old man who likes maintenance fees paid on time." I glanced around the room as if afraid the man was standing behind the curtain. Daniel opened the stack of documents, pointing at each line. "The building maintenance fund isn't just for repairs, replacing lights, or clearing snow," Daniel said. "Half of it gets funneled through 3 shell companies. Nice-sounding names, but they don't exist in the tax system." "You're sure?" "Sure," Landon answered, his voice hoarse but precise. "I'm an engineer. Rose, I know when schematics, invoices, and technical reports don't match." Mira flipped to another photo. This one showed a folded document, its header torn but still readable. "Facility renovation Phase 4. Funding adjustment." "The Phase 4 project isn't in the public maintenance schedule," Daniel added. Pieces began shifting into place on their own. "You mean?" "The building is being used for laundering money." All 3 of them looked at the stack of documents. I studied the picture of the SUV's license plate again. The last 4 digits matched the vehicle I'd seen in the garage last week, close to midnight. When I went down to get my back pain medication, I had thought it was a visitor's car. Now that I remembered how it turned off its headlights the moment it saw me, I wasn't sure anymore what it had been doing there. Daniel crossed his arms. "We have to assume the worst. They know what Landon found." "And you too," Mira said, her voice trembling slightly, "are on the next list." I looked at them one by one. The bruises on Mira's body, Landon's bandaged arm, the way Daniel kept standing to the side watching the window, the door, the hallway every time a sound shifted. None of this was coincidence. "My baby and I were threatened," I said quietly. "When did they call you?" "Right when I walked into the nursery." Daniel took the photos back from Mira and stacked them neatly. "Rose," he said, without sugarcoating it, "from now on you cannot go anywhere alone." "I'm serious. No walking outside alone at night, no going home alone, no driving alone." "So what do we do?" Landon took a difficult breath. "When I found those documents, the technical systems maintenance schedules started changing constantly. Basement lights flickered at odd hours, and someone locked the technical room door from the outside," Daniel added. "These past 2 weeks, Landon sent everything to Mira because he was afraid his email was being monitored. Mira passed it to me because she was being followed even more closely after her sister disappeared. I turned to Mira. Is your sister's case connected to all of this? Mira pressed her lips together. I don't know, she whispered. But I have a feeling. They wanted me to stop asking. Daniel looked at us with an unsettling clarity. That building isn't just a place to live, he said. It's a cover, and we four of us are the only ones who know the real extent of it. So what do the four of us do first? Daniel glanced at the hallway before answering, his voice lowering. First, find out who in the building is watching us, and second, protect you and the baby. The next morning, before the snow had melted, I was already in a small conference room on the hospital's third floor, a temporary workspace used by federal agencies when cooperating with the hospital. The white lights hitting the stainless steel tables made the air feel colder. Landon sat in a wheelchair, Mira wrapped in the sweater the hospital had lent her. I stood beside them, trying to keep my breathing steady. Daniel came in last, carrying a file bag under his arm. He set it down like someone accustomed to handling serious paperwork. A federal agent, a man around 50, cautious in demeanor, began. We'll collect all evidence this morning. From now on, all information must go through the investigative unit. No more personal emails. Daniel nodded quickly. Understood. This is everything we gathered. He slid the file bag toward the agent. I watched his hand, steady, not shaking. A man who had endured a long, tense night but remained composed. Either very good at staying calm, or prepared for this far too long. I didn't know what made me start noticing it. Maybe it was his expression, not avoiding eye contact, but lacking the sort of fear a person should have if they felt hunted. Or maybe it was how he cut Mira off every time she tried to add something. But the first thing that truly made my body tense was Landon's phone. Landon was explaining how he discovered the altered documents when the agent asked him to open his messages to confirm the time he contacted Daniel. Landon took the phone from his hospital coat pocket, but the lock screen lit up with unread notifications. One of them was the original message Daniel claimed he accidentally saw when Landon dropped his phone last night. That message mattered. It contained the part where Landon texted Mira about the technical room being mysteriously locked. But when Landon opened his messages, the message was gone. That's strange, Landon muttered. It disappeared. The messages enten towel de fire. The messages on the mein Straks toweled. The messages on the mein Straks toweled. The messages on the mutter de fired. The messages on the mein toweled. I looked straight at Daniel. He didn't look at the phone. Didn't look confused. It might have auto-deleted during an update. Or a sync error. But his voice held no irritation. No worry. An innocent man, when evidence disappears right in front of federal agents, should panic. Daniel didn't. 10 minutes later, while the agent examined each printed photo from Mira, I saw Mira pull a small slip of paper from her coat pocket. She rolled it tight, as if afraid anyone might see it. While Daniel turned to discuss something with the agent, Mira leaned toward me and whispered very quietly, "Rose? I have to tell you this." I glanced at Daniel. He stood exactly 4 steps from us, but his posture made me feel like he heard everything anyway. "What is it?" I whispered back, barely more than breath. Mira unrolled the paper just enough for me to see 3 faint ballpoint words. Don't trust. "I wrote it while we were still in the observation room," Mira said, her voice trembling softly. I didn't dare say it aloud. "D is Daniel?" I asked. "I heard him say something on the phone before you came back to the hospital last night," Mira whispered. "He was standing right by the door. I don't think he knew I was awake." "What did you hear?" "Just one sentence. Don't worry. She went home." I was about to say something when the agent asked Mira for her phone. Mira startled, tucking the slip of paper into her sleeve, so quickly, I didn't think anyone could have noticed. The meeting went on for nearly another half hour. When we were about to sign the evidence transfer forms, a receipt slipped out of the folder Daniel had handed over. A thermal slip from an ATM inside a downtown bank. The paper was wrinkled, but the line identifying the recipient of the deposit was still clear. Daniel Lane. Deposit $4,000, not like a regular paycheck, and dated exactly the day Landon had his first incident. Daniel snatched the receipt quickly and said flatly. Car repairs. Car repairs. No one questioned it, but the way he pocketed it too fast, a bit jerky, made the agent glance at him for a full second. When the agent stepped out to verify some of the original documents, I stood. I hated confronting anyone in a hospital room, but here in a sealed conference room, no nurses, no passers-by, there would not be a better moment to look Daniel straight on. I walked over to the table where he was bending down to tie his shoe. Daniel, I said. He lifted his head, calm expression, as if I was about to ask to borrow a pen. What do you want? Last night. Who were you talking to on the phone? 1 second, 2 seconds, then he gave a small smile like someone who already knew the question was coming. Who told you that? Just answer me. The smile vanished. Daniel straightened, towering over me by almost a full head. The overhead lights threw sharp angles across his face. I was handling work calls, Daniel replied. What kind of work requires you to tell someone I was home? I continued. And the message in Landon's phone, the only person who touched it last night, was you. Daniel's posture stalled for a beat. I don't need to read your friend's messages, he said. But you saw it. I answered. You're the one who reminded me about it last night. His expression shifted. No longer neutral. Something like regret. No, not regret. Anger at being figured out. Daniel. Landon's crash wasn't an accident. He didn't deny it, didn't even try. Then he said one sentence, his voice no longer even pretending to be normal. Landon brought that on himself. Mira exploded. You hired someone to do it, didn't you? You thought Landon was having an affair with me, so you. Be quiet. Daniel turned back to me. Don't think I didn't know how often Landon came to my apartment. He continued, voice low, almost a hiss. I just didn't expect all of you to catch up so quickly. Landon gripped the wheelchair handles so hard his knuckles went white. You thought I was sleeping with your wife. Landon growled. Daniel didn't confirm it. His eyes said everything. I told them to scare him. I didn't think they'd go that far. Who is they? I asked. Daniel smirked faintly. People you don't want to name. I heard the faint scrape of Landon's wheelchair wheels as he tried to turn toward Daniel. Mira stood frozen, one hand against her chest like she had to hold her ribs in place. I only stood there, my heart slowing as if to hear every word that came next. But Daniel didn't continue. He only looked at me, no remorse, no plea, no attempt at justification. A very still look, quiet in a dangerous way. I guess, Daniel said softly, this is where it ends. I don't know what made me move fast enough to grab my phone from my coat pocket. Maybe maternal instinct. Maybe fear. Maybe the sense that if I didn't do it right then, I never would. I pressed record with my thumb right inside the pocket. No one saw. And I kept it running. Agent Parker walked back into the room at the exact moment Daniel took a step toward the door, as if he was about to walk out mid-meeting. What's going on in here? The agent asked, placing the file on the table. Daniel switched back to his normal tone instantly. Nothing. We were waiting for you. But Mira, still shaken, stepped forward and grabbed the agent's sleeve like someone at the edge of a cliff. You have to listen to us. Daniel cut her off. Mira, calm down. I pulled the phone from my pocket. Agent Parker, I said, addressing him directly. I think you need to hear this. I played the recording. I told them to scare him. I didn't think they'd go that far. Daniel's voice filled the small room, clear as glass. Mira stumbled back a step. Landon tightened his grip on the wheelchair. Daniel didn't move, but his eyes narrowed into two thin slits as if calculating escape routes. Agent Parker stared at him. Do you want to explain that? I saw the muscle in Daniel's jaw shift. He blinked once, slow, heavy, as if deciding whether it was worth keeping the act going. Then he turned to me. You're sharper than I thought, Rose. His right hand swung, knocking the metal chair aside with a piercing crash. The chair fell in a direction that startled Mira back, and Daniel lunged toward the door. But Agent Parker was faster than he expected. 2 long strides, and he blocked the exit, pressing a hand on Daniel's shoulder, forcing him back against the table. Daniel twisted. But Landon, with only one uninjured arm, managed to hook his foot around Daniel's leg long enough to slow him, just enough for 2 more agents to rush in. In less than 10 seconds, Daniel was forced down onto the steel table. Handcuffs snapped shut with a small click, but it echoed like the lid of a coffin. The files were handed over right after Daniel was escorted out. The agents didn't let us leave alone. They brought Mira back to her hospital room, took Landon for another check on his injuries, and assigned a female agent to go with me to the apartment so I could pack a few essentials. My apartment looked exactly the same as it had a few hours earlier, but the moment I stepped inside, I felt as if the space had shifted. The nursery cabinet was still open. The crib still had the faint crease where the envelope once lay, but this time, walking past it, I didn't shiver. I was just tired. So tired I almost wanted to lie down on the floor for a moment. The female agent placed a hand on my shoulder. "We'll pull every camera. When the baby arrives, we'll set up security per your request." 3 weeks later. Almost everything had changed. The money laundering ring was dismantled. Daniel was arrested along with 3 maintenance personnel from the building. Mira was cleared. Even the police apologized for their initial suspicions in her sister's disappearance. They found new leads from Daniel's confession and reopened the case with full federal support. Landon healed slowly but steadily. He apologized to me several times for hiding the investigation about the building. "I didn't want you dragged into it," he said, staring at the floor. "I thought the less you knew, the safer you were." I didn't blame him. Not because I wasn't angry, but because after everything we'd seen, the hidden cameras, the envelope in the crib, the death threats, I understood why he had to do it. And I will never forget Landon in that hospital room, his hands shaking from pain, but his eyes shaking more from fear of losing me. I gave birth on a clear morning. Landon was allowed to hold the baby first. His hands still trembled a bit after weeks in a brace, but he held our child with such care that I could have watched that moment forever. He leaned down and whispered something into the baby's ear, a promise. Maybe, I couldn't hear it. I lay on the hospital bed watching the 2 of them, and for the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel heavy anymore. Landon looked back at me. His eyes were no longer the eyes of someone carrying secrets. They were the eyes of someone who had survived a storm with me. "Rose," he said softly, "I'm sorry. You once hid the truth to protect me," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "And I'll live honestly to protect our child." Landon lowered his head. I couldn't tell if he was crying, but his hand tightened around mine, like an unspoken agreement. I looked at my baby again. The child slept peacefully, breathing evenly, a tiny hand gripping Landon's collar as if holding on to safety itself. For the first time, I felt calm, not because all the danger was gone, but because I knew whatever came next, I wouldn't be facing it alone. And that was the true beginning of our family. There are moments I still look back on, the long nights in the hospital, the trembling footsteps down cold hallways, and the second my baby held my hand for the very first time. Life sometimes takes us a long way around just to bring us back to what matters most: peace and the people who truly stand with us. If you felt something from this story, let me know. Where are you watching from? And have you ever had a turning point that made you see everything differently? And don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe so we can walk together through the next stories. Thank you for staying until the very end.